Okay. All right. Now this is my 2.5-year-old granddaughter doing Zoom with her reading circle at preschool. And you know, I've been doing Zoom for, you know, weather-related things because they're in Boston, so occasionally, you know, they can't get where they need to go. But they've been doing, that was the first thing they taught them in preschool, was to how to use Zoom to conference with people. And so there's, you know, she's all of 2.5, and she's already, you know, learning online tools so that she can have the ability to go to school. So I'm assuming that that's probably going to be more regular practice, you know, than it is for her. I've got a chat thing here. Let me turn on the chat screen. There we go. Okay. But it, you know, this is, I mean, it's not a toy. She knows what it's for. She knows that, you know, this is a school thing. So anytime they're on Zoom, they're doing schoolwork. But it is a different world. You know, my son, who's trying to get a 500 employee operation up and running from scratch in Boston for the Cap One data services. You know, Cap One came in early last week, and said, okay, we're going to run a VPN test with all of our associates around the world, and if everybody can get on, and we can have you know, enough broadband, enough bandwidth to be able to handle, you know, a typical load from all those folks, we're going online work from home for at least the next month. And that was 2 weeks ago, or a week and a half ago, I guess. And so they've been doing that for a week and a half. Now it looks like they're going to probably stretch it into a second month. And you know, it's a real deal. In Virginia, they just shut down schools for the rest of the year. And so the K-12 schools are not able to open, and it's up to the individual school systems to figure out how they're going to handle online instruction or remote instruction. They've already canceled the standards of learning test, the AP test, the SAT test. So, you know, baccalaureate stuff, they've already canceled that. They've canceled graduation. It's going to be at best virtual, and they're not even sure how they can pull that off. So this is, you know, this is the real deal. This is the new normal for a while, and you know, it's kind of an interesting. If it weren't so, you know, scary in some ways, it would be, in fact, it is a very interesting case study. And, you know, leadership and understanding projections and understanding using data to inform decisions, and, you know, all those things that we kind of talk about as a way of leadership, or a way of thinking about leadership. But it's also speaks to how we have to organize institutions and organize colleges and organize. You know, we're not generally set up to do this real well, because we still are sort of in a very archaic system where, you know, we assume the best communications are always face to face, you know, with a handshake 3 feet away. And, you know, if we're going to do anything, that's where the real stuff has to be done. We still require, you know, sort of live ink signatures on forms. You know, you can't have, you know, several forms. I have some doctoral forms here for folks that were trying to get ready, you know, to postpone at least one person asked for a waiver into next year, and they're on their last year. And the survey that we're going to do, the company that we're going to do the survey with, sent them an email and said, well, why don't we just hold off on that for a while until things settle down a little bit more. And so, she's left holding the bag ready to go. And so, she's going to have to back off into another year probably. We have to get permission and a waiver, the whole sorts of things. I'm trying to set up committees for 2 other dissertation students that are wanting to do dissertations. And, I'm not in Boone, and the people in Boone aren't at the office. And one lady on one committee is on pregnancy leave in Albany. And, she's due in about, 10 days. So, I mean, the only way we have to communicate, the only way we have to deal with forms and things like that, it can't be live signatures. I mean, it would be driving the post office nuts with stuff trying to do that. But so we've asked permission to do, PDF copy signatures and things like that. And nobody said no yet. So I'm just assuming that that's all going to be okay for a while. Faculty meetings canceled, college meetings canceled, committee meetings canceled, deadlines. Well, maybe we won't make that one. Maybe we won't make that one. So this is a quite a different normal. And I've learned a long time ago just to kind of go with the flow, because when you've been doing this for 45 years, you figure out after a while that we will survive this. We will get past this, and there will be a new model, a new normal. We won't go back to the way we were. I mean, that's we're going to learn some things out of this that will make it possible to make some changes in higher ed that we haven't been able to make. And probably, if I know bean counters, they're probably looking at the beans right now and trying to figure out if this model of working from home or, online instruction or whatever has some, advantage to it. And in certain ways it does, at least until we overwhelm the systems that we have in place. But we don't have the infrastructure to put everybody online, and right now they're shutting down particular systems, at 9 o'clock at night for an hour, and As You Learn will be offline 6 o'clock tomorrow morning for an hour, and Zoom will be off from here to there, and because they're taxing the systems. And if you record a session and you put it up on the cloud, which is the automatic way I always record to my computer. But if you record it to the cloud, it might get processed for you to post probably within 48 hours, maybe, because the Zoom and cloud servers they use are not set up to handle, the load of recorded sessions. And then you put all the big industries back online with Zoom and having conferences with up to 300 people on Zoom. And so it's we're about to tax the infrastructure. And so you can expect between now and the end of the semester there to be some, some crashes, some things are going to go down, and we're going to be out, not able to do this, that, or the other for a day or 2 days or whatever while they try to figure it out. But it is a new world, and we may or may not be quite set up to deal with it. So those are kind of my wanderings and musings, and I've spent my excess time at home just kind of reading a few things, catching up on a few things, and still trying to figure out what to do with a class that has 3 required assignments left that all go into student portfolios, and we have enough time to do one of them. And so we have to kind of decide which one we're going to do, and that question is one I can't answer. So I keep putting these students off, saying, hey, I can't tell you quite yet what the revised schedule looks like. I'm waiting for one more piece of information, one more word from someone. And as soon as I get that, it'll either be option A or option B. I got both of them ready. I just don't know which one it's going to be. And so it's, that's where we are with this stuff. What happens with special needs kids, public school? Their parents have some ability to deal with their disabilities, but not, they're certainly not trained, and to deal with it in a totally professional manner. And so how do they deal with that? I mean, how do you, we're going to have some, I'm going to use a statistical term. It's not meant to be a morbid term, but we're going to have some mortality in classes, and all that means, it doesn't mean people die off in the class, though I suppose that's not out the realm of possibilities, but it does mean that people that start the class don't finish the class for no reason, no problem with them at all, just, kind of the what they have to deal with. Canvas has crashed. Okay. Blackboard, your Blackboard Moodle setup has crashed. Well, it helps to know As You Learn is built on a Moodle platform. Okay. And some of the backbone structure of Zoom is a wiki structure, which is built on a Moodle platform. So, those should be some problems, I'm sure. Well, you like attrition better than mortality? I'll use attrition. I'm just trying to be very statistical and very technical here. It's, it's mortality and the statistics. Okay. So, those are my musings. Those are my ramblings. I'd like to hear from you, your experiences so far. And your sense about whether your institution you're dealing with had the, capacity to deal with this, and how they're going. Everybody is struggling. I mean, there are no smooth transitions here, but how are they doing? Are things going? And we'll talk a little bit about the future. What do we see for the future? So, who wants to kick that off?
I can go. We had a very interesting week. I think ours went a little smoother than we anticipated because we've been thinking about it for a while. Like that last lecture night we had with you, Dr. Bolt, we had already started talking on campus that week about doing things. So it went smoother, but you still have the calls from the students and getting staff their equipment off campus. And I was in self-isolation from my trip. So how did I get stuff? And I think that was our biggest problem, was just getting the staff and faculty the equipment that they needed and the support that they needed to do this. And our students just kind of, this today, other than Moodle crashing, although it's back up now, our students kind of picked right up and seemed to be doing okay, for the most part, from the ones I've talked to. We've tried to call all of our advisees throughout the week, just to touch base with them. But I think, on our end, it was just getting staff and faculty exactly what they needed to be off campus and forwarding our phones and all that. But
let me caution you that generally the bumps don't happen early. They happen as you get into it, because people fall back into sort of bad patterns, and there's a certain level of excitement, and accounting systems and procurement systems and all that sort of stuff are different. They're kind of patched together now. It's kind of like a patchwork, and there will be inevitably some things that'll break down or go wrong, or you'll just have to walk in and say, okay, well, what's happening today? And it's a little hard if you're the person in charge to not be physically in the facility. And that's part of the difficulty, is that you're there kind of by yourself, and you're worried about your safety and your all those things, but you kind of have to be where the records are and where the you know, the finance programs are and things like that. And those things you typically can't take offline with you. You can't take online with you, off site. There are some processes purely by uh, federal and state accounting standards and budgeting standards that you can't take home. And so there will be people that have to be there that, you know, may wish they weren't, but they really don't have a choice in the matter. And that, you know, their stress level is like Zoom. It's up here. I mean, it's easy when you're online and remote. You can always just kill the connection and hey, you know, oops, sorry, broadband's down, sorry. But if you're there, you're gonna have to deal with everything that comes your way.
Well, and where they're saying that at least in the community colleges, students can use their tuition if they have to withdraw. They can use their tuition for either the summer, fall, or spring semester. We have no idea how that's looking, you know, going to look. So we've got the students calling, well, how is that going to happen for me? You know, should I go ahead and withdraw?
Yep.
And we've got some instructors saying, well, we'll give you an incomplete. Some saying, well, you just have to withdraw. You know, there's not been consistent in terms of which the classes are different. I mean, welding, you can get an incomplete and, you know, complete over the summer, but that might not be the same case for English 111. So that's been a lot of our kind of problem in terms of the student end as of this morning anyway. Like you said, things are just going to keep getting more complicated.
Well, yeah. But you'll deal with them one at a time. That's all you can do. I mean, budgets, you know, for a long time in almost every state and every you know, college system, whether it's a higher ed system or a community college system or whatever type of system it is, they're almost always zero base, which means that there's not a way that the auditors really like for you to carry money forward across a fiscal year. It's just not, you know, and generally they require you to pay for things within the fiscal year that those things actually happen. And so it's you know, it is but they'll figure it out. I mean, the state will have to make some accommodations, and I'm sure they will. But you know, for the time being, you know, all those things in the policy manuals don't hold. And so you kind of have to, where do we go with this?
So one of the so one of the other things that we've been dealing with in our area, because I teach in health sciences, and so it's been a huge struggle of, you know, how do you move these courses 100% online, because I can't assess student skills that are hands-on online. So that's been a challenge. For me, it's not been a huge stretch because one of the programs that I manage, a large part of their classes are online anyway, but the other one is a healthcare class, medical assisting to be exact. And so, you know, the students are worried about, well, if we can't go to our clinicals, then we can't graduate, because the community college system has pulled most of the health science students out of clinicals. There are some programs that they have given waivers and allowed them to remain in clinicals. But then, you know, some of them they can go, others they can't. So, or if you're a student in a nursing program, you can continue in your clinicals. But if you're a student in a radiography program or medical assisting, you're not allowed to go. So it's like you got these students that all communicate with each other, and they get the message of, oh, well, your profession is more important than the other. So it's definitely been a challenge.
Yeah, and that covers a lot of bases. I mean, in terms of practicums and you know, like in the education side of things, the student teaching hours and practicum hours, and in the clinical side of things, you know, like speech pathology and you know, health sciences, as you said, but also the, you know, clinical psychiatric services, things like that. I mean, you just really, a lot of that is based on learning that is accomplished on site with real real clients and real patients. And you can't, all those programs are built around the model, as I imagine most health sciences programs are too, where you have to be able to translate the content pieces and the protocol pieces that you learn, in a classroom or online or whatever. You have to be able to translate those into a real clinical setting, into a live setting. And if you don't have access to live settings, then not only do you not have enough time, quote unquote, hours for licensures and things like that, but you don't have any way of taking that knowledge and those routines and those protocols and converting them into real life application. Because there's nothing like taking those real life applications. And that's where students that are in those types of programs that have those things, that's where they do most of their learning, is when they're, I think I read that in the book, what we're supposed to do here, but you can't do that. You have to know what needs to happen there, and you have to know how to handle, 30 kids that are going nuts and things like that. I mean, you can only learn those, you can only become an expert or move toward expertise in those things in the live world. And so it's, that's a big issue for lots of things. I mean, you can't, and now that, has North Carolina shut down schools for the rest of the year, or did somebody say it was
May 15th, as of right now.
As of right now?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and everything is probably tentative even for May 15th, I imagine, because it looks like we're kind of just now beginning to get in the nice, bad part of this curve where it has we at this point, not to bother you with the math of it, but when you look at exponential growth, you can assume that the numbers will double every 2 to 3 days. So the number of cases will double, the number of deaths will double. It'll all double every 2 to 3 days. And it'll continue to do that depending upon how this social distancing thing is working and shelter in place thing is working. That'll burn through in, 3 weeks to a month, or it might be a month and a half. If it's 3 weeks to a month, there'll be a lot more cases, a lot more deaths. If it's a month and a half to 2 months, there won't be quite as many cases, and there'll be substantially fewer deaths. I think I saw one projection on Virginia, and if the shelter in place and social distancing stuff holds and people actually participate in it and actually do it, Virginia could look to see about 3,000 deaths, 3,000 to 5,000 deaths. If we had not done the social distancing or the shutdowns, the projection would have been about 172,000 deaths. So that's the difference between rapid exponential growth and, sort of, they keep talking about flattening the curve. There's, it's a slow exponential growth as opposed to rapid exponential growth. And so it's a real deal. I mean, this is like nothing we've ever seen before, period. So, and I can't, I try to, keep kind of a light thing going because not much you can do about it except do your part. And so there's no sense getting all down in the dumps over it. It's, you do your part, and I'm kind of one of those guys that if it gets you, it gets you. If it don't, great. Then we'll all come out on the other side. 97% of us will come out on the other side. So you have to look at that. Hello, somebody else.
I can speak. I know that we had a challenge where I work because our community college actually had the first week of March had our spring break. Then we went back to school. So when a lot of other people were already on spring break and then colleges were making decisions, we're going to extend spring break for 2 weeks, we were already back the week of March the 8th, in which a couple of my coworkers in my department have been to Florida visiting family during spring break, and they were told to self-quarantine for that week and push their classes online. And that's the only thing that the college did, and they continue to operate as normal. And then they waited until Friday the 13th to even make a decision as to whether or not we would move online. Friday the 13th at 9:50 p.m., the college president sent us an email to say that we're going to move things online, but faculty and staff would still report the following week. So it just was and then all the emails were coming late at night, and faculty and staff were very upset coming in on that Monday the 16th saying, why did this not come out earlier? They were sitting in meetings knowing it was coming. And so it wasn't until Thursday of this past week that they allowed people to even work from home. So people who were on self-quarantine during the week of the 8th were told to return to work because the students wouldn't be there on the 16th. The only thing we can say is that it's brought the faculty and staff together, and they actually went to the press. So, and they pushed back on the new, because we have a new president who only started in October, a provost who's been very challenging to all faculty and doesn't really, she's not faculty friendly. So it's been an interesting challenge that a lot of emails and correspondence has been late at night, not allowing people to sit and digest it, not having department chairs have meetings with their staff or faculty. So for me as a communication person, because that was my background, I'm thinking, I understand this is a crisis mode and we don't know what to do, but you still need to allow people to gather and create a plan. So it really kind of opened up a lot where I work at a larger community college of how unprepared they were. But yet faculty kind of working and pushing back with very quality statements on this is what we need to do to better serve our students. Because more of their fear was not only those healthcare classes, but we have a lot of faculty who don't know how to teach online at all. And so they actually during the week, this past week, the week of the 16th, were going to expect us to continue to teach classes and convert all your classes to online at the same time, until the governor issued, we don't want people in school, because we have a lot of middle college students. So for me, it's been an interesting challenge and a lot more stress than it needed to be, to hear a lot of emails and correspondence from leadership telling us work harder, you come to be on campus, this is where you're supposed to be, you work for the taxpayers. That was in one email. And I'm thinking other places were already telling their faculty and staff to be at home, support your family, take care of your own health. So that to me has been an interesting insight to, and so I've been getting text messages from people I work with that remind me, well, other people work for taxpayers and they're getting to take care of, because my mom had a transplant, so I'm her caregiver. And for me, it's like, I have to take care of my mom and I have to watch because I have to take care of, her health care. And it was like, we don't care. We're not making exceptions for you. So it's been an interesting challenge.
Yeah, it's, and Greg will come to you in just a sec. It's, well, I'm of a cross minds here, okay, which often I am, but in this regard, it's kind of like, okay, this guy's new. He's not new to this, it's not new to higher ed, he's new to this setting. And obviously it's kind of been impressed on him that he needs to go in and, get control of the setting and, kind of, come down fairly firm to begin with and, all that sort of stuff. And so, he's trying to do his bit without using, the sort of the common sense component of it. And trying to use a top-down model. We looked at that organizational structure of the top-down model. Top-down models don't work in a crisis. I mean, unless you've got an exceptional person at the top that can kind of, get the whole scheme of things and understand, all the different directions things are going. And that's unusual. And so top-down models don't work real well in a crisis. Everybody needs to have a little flexibility. Everybody needs to have, a little common sense. And you know, as you said, it may have turned into a little bit of a good thing, because at least the faculty have come together in some sense, and then begin to have some shared thoughts about things, and you know, all those sorts of things. It'll be interesting to see if the new president learned anything in the process. And I suspect you know, his ears have been full. You know, he's been fielding phone calls and, you know, emails and text messages and calls from Raleigh, and you know, all that. I mean, he's really probably had his hands full, because he didn't necessarily, you know, there's an old saying, you know, don't bring me a problem unless there's a solution attached to it. And you know, that's kind of what he had. He had a problem, but he didn't really have a solution, because he's new. He didn't know. He already, you know, maybe if he knew, he thought it would look bad or something. Who knows? I mean, who knows what goes on in people's minds? But it obviously could have been handled a touch better. Yeah, just a little bit. Can't leave people in doubt. You got to make a call. You make a call, and then you kind of go on. Okay, Greg.
Yeah, so high adventure at the Air Force Academy for sure. CU Boulder, which is really the flagship of the state, announced that they were going to online only really early. I think it was March 5th, like a Thursday. I'm sure there had been some coordination between the other universities within the Colorado University system, but they were out front and did that. And then within 2 or 3 days, all the other universities, Colorado State, Pueblo, UCCS, all those, and even some of the privates, decided to follow suit with that. And at the Air Force Academy, we were like, well, are we going to follow this lead? What are we going to do? There was people were trying to decide what the other military's academies were going to do. Were we waiting on that? Were we going to lead with that? Well, a week later, we finally decided to go online with that. But the interesting thing about that is we sent all the freshmen through juniors home, but have kept the seniors, because there are some congressionally mandated requirements hands-on requirements that they have to do to be commissioned as second lieutenants at the end of the year, that they've got to get done. And we, you know, the thought was we can't really wait another year to do that. So what they did was send those 3 classes home. We also have a prep school, which is about 200 high school kids that didn't get accepted, but they come in and do an additional year and are trained up on areas, and then usually they are accepted as a freshman the next year. We sent them home as well, and then we spread all the seniors out, so each of them has their individual own room now, and they're doing online for their classes for the remainder of the semester. But for their hands-on requirements, they have what's called an AOC, which is Air Operation Commander. You can consider it like a tactical officer for the squadron that they're in. And they will meet one-on-one with their AOC several times, or how many ever requirements they have, and knock those requirements out so they can graduate and be commissioned on time. So it's just really odd that, you know, 3,000 students are gone. We've still got about 1,000 right there that we're doing hands-on stuff with. But they're still confined. The whole cadet area is locked down. I went in a couple days ago to check out, and they invalidated my ID card. I couldn't even get into the cadet area. So they're quarantined there, and we'll be there until they're done. So it's just an interesting training environment for sure.
Unmute. I guess I have to unmute, don't I? Yeah, that's what that meant. You know, the military kind of had a unique way of dealing with this, you know, this virus threat, in that they brought everybody back on base, canceled a lot of leaves, and locked the base down. Didn't really lock it down. It didn't change the security all that much, but they just basically brought everybody back on base, and you know, tried to manage it that way. I'm not sure how it's going to work for them because they, the Spanish flu, in case you didn't know it, actually started at Fort Dix in the U.S. And, some of those soldiers were at Fort Dix training, and it was a crossover from I want to say a goat or something, a sheep or goat or something. It was a virus that crossed over from a sheep or a goat and into, a soldier, and then it spread very quickly. And by the time they got to Europe, the ones that were going to Europe, they were basically, full bore Spanish flu. And so, they turned them around, but they had been in contact with people already. And so the folks that actually alerted people were 2 reporters in Spain, because Spain was a neutral party in World War I. They had staked out a neutral position. And so there were a couple of reporters in Spain that identified this illness and identified, from the flow of traffic, back and forth between the U.S. and Europe, that it had started at Fort Dix. And then once they began investigating at Fort Dix, they quickly discovered that that was the epicenter of it. And it was radiating out from Fort Dix across the U.S. And so that's why the quote unquote Spanish flu hit the U.S. with such ferocity first, is because it started here. And the mortality rate on that was somewhere around 30%. And this one is somewhere between 1% and 3%. So, but it started at Fort Dix, and it's Spanish flu because a couple of Spanish reporters identified it. And I went back and looked at my family tree. Everybody's got a family tree that you put together, an ancestry, and you kind of go back and you look back, and at certain periods of time, it just seems like people die. And it's like, what happened to this person? Or where did this guy go? Or this, how come he never got married? Or, and if you look real close, you'll discover that there's a thread of those that run about 1917, 1918. And that was, it was devastating. Spanish flu, killed whole families, and even out in the sticks, because you had all these, soldiers coming back and didn't realize that they were still carriers. So they were carrying Spanish flu. Anyhow, a little historical note there in case you didn't know that. Yeah, but it is, you can, the military academies have some unique requirements, but they also have some unique resources to be able to deal with them. And, that was certainly well thought through, and there probably was a plan in place that was somebody found and dusted off and said, oh, we got a plan for this. And, that was kind of the way it kind of worked there. Most of us didn't have a plan. And so who knows where it goes. Anyone else?
I can share from the administration side, and sorry, I was a little late joining. I was actually at work on UNC's campus because we are essential for getting people paid. So it's been a little different.
Yeah.
It's been a little different for us. I was reading through some of the comments, on the community college side. We were also waiting from the system office for a while to get guidance on what we were going to do. And really, we received the most traction once we had a confirmed case of coronavirus on campus. And once that happened, everything started moving extremely fast to get people off. So I wonder if that was the hesitation to get people going, or what was happening. But I will say that our campus is pretty empty right now. We do have a few international students who could not make it home, or they could not go back because their areas are level 3 and level 4 countries. So they're still on campus. So we still have to keep the dining facilities going and some of the auxiliaries going for them, but they are still on campus, spread out a little bit like the seniors at the military academy. But I will say I had to go to campus today, and it was my first site of a tent city. So we have a tent city set up. There's a couple of them for coronavirus.
Drive through.
And I was a part of the university during SARS, which was our last almost pandemic that we were active in UNC. And so it reminded me a lot of that. But I'll say once we had an active case, and now there are cases that they're not sure are community spread or direct contact, we did receive a little bit more traction of moving people. But some of us are still there. But we are running a skeletal staff of 3 people in the office. Most of the work is from home, and that's what's going on there.
Yeah, and it's I'm sure y'all saw the stories on TV over the weekend of the kids at spring break and talking about, I worked hard for this spring break. I'm all this sort of stuff. And now the stories are coming out about multiple, positive tests and hospitalizations out of the kids that went to spring break at different places. And you kind of wonder about the damage done by mixed messages. Now, I'm not going to get political. You can probably figure my politics pretty quickly, and that's okay. Don't worry about it. I will not get political, but I do think you have to have a consistent message. And the message is informed by the science, and the message is informed by the experts. I mean, when you get into something like this, you don't ask the dentist, tell me about a viral outbreak. I mean, you ask a virologist or an epidemiologist, or, if nobody else is around, you ask Fauci because he knows everything. But, what you do is you base your decisions on the best science, the best experts you have available. And, we're going to talk a little bit tonight. I don't know whether we will or not. We'll see how it plays into it here a bit, about the role of politics. Now, the readings I gave you were readings that were talking about sort of internal politics in an institution or an organization. But politics is politics. It is trying to put the message that you want to have out there in the best possible light that you can put that message in. And you see it with university presidents. You see it in presidents and governors, and they're all at some level a bit of a political animal. I mean, you kind of have to be. I mean, if you're going to be successful in a higher ed institution, you have to know the politics. You have to know, where the power is at and who makes the decisions. And it's not necessarily chain of command, and who has the ear of who, and all those things. You kind of have to understand those things and know, what levers are available to you to be able to do things. But I can't help but think that, having mixed messages on one side saying this is an illness like we've never seen before and a pandemic like we've never seen before. And, the other message was, it'll be over next week or a few days. As soon as the weather turns, we'll be fine. And so I think, people hear what they want to hear. And kids wanted to go on spring break, so I'm going to go to spring break, I'm going to party, I'm going to lay on the beach, I'm going to get blind drunk, and then whatever else. And the last thing they had in mind was sheltering in place or social distancing, shall we speak. And so it is it's unfortunate. And it may cost us in the end a few more lives. But, hopefully we'll listen to the science and get a little bit better at it. I don't know. What are your thoughts about the sort of the, and I don't want to get into, like liberal conservative politics sort of thing, but what are your thoughts about, the politics of things at institutions, but also in governing boards and bodies that need to make decisions.
There's kind of a time and place for everything. And when you have a pandemic or a crisis like this, there's really, in my opinion, no time for political agendas and different things. You need to just get to the heart of the issues. For example, I work at a private school, and I'm actually not in higher education yet, but I'm the director of curriculum, and so my job has quadrupled as the new distance learning curriculum person, along with I work directly with my administration. So we have been working nonstop in every direction, on Zoom, teaching teachers Zoom, all kinds of instructional technology. And thankfully I have a background in that, but the teachers for the most part are, just jumping right in. But then there's that parent piece and the student piece, and making sure everybody's getting the same message, like you said, one consistent message. But then on the flip side, I now have 2 college students, one from NC State and one from Chapel Hill, who are at home now learning full time. And I have a niece who's at a public school who is out of school now, who is spending some time with us because my sister-in-law is a nurse at UNC Chapel Hill. So I think the reason I share all that is that it's complex, and it's just going to have layers upon layers upon layers of how it affects people and jobs and losing jobs and who's essential and who's not essential. And I'm on a tangent, but just that you really have to look at, kind of like in my mind, almost like the military, what is the problem and how is the most efficient with the least amount of negative impact, the most positive decision with the least amount of negative impact, and then move forward and then be done, and then move on to the next thing and be done. I had a teacher today that was sweating all kinds of small stuff. I said, we don't have time for small stuff. Move on. Let's go. And jump on and come on. Throw that over. We're not doing with that. And almost like people need coaches now. They need people to be hopeful. It can't be all doomsday or nobody's going to get through this. I think I'm done with my monologue.
Okay, rants are okay.
My children call them monologues, but
Well,
it's just, you got to go straight forward and kind of, this is like a race. It's endurance. Let's do this.
Yeah, you control what you can control, and that's always the motto in sort of accomplishing things. I mean, yeah, I would like to see this have been done better, but we're where we are, and you have to take stock and you have to figure out where we are and how do we get to the next place. And sometimes a good rant's how you get there. I mean, you just kind of you have to vent these things, and that's part of the reason that I'm not reading from a PowerPoint or a slider thing tonight, because this is going to be a case study in higher ed organization, higher ed theory, and higher ed management that we'll be constructing for about the next, I don't know how many years. Mm-hmm. And so, it's we've never seen this. I cannot think of a single instance in my 70 years where we've shut down stuff this completely. Mm-hmm. Simply because we didn't have any way of dealing with it, and we don't. We have no immunity. This thing's playing with a blank slate. It can do whatever it wants to do, and if viruses don't have a heart, they don't have a soul, they don't have a purpose. Their whole function is to latch onto something and replicate, mm-hmm. and then go to something else and replicate. go to something else and replicate. And so we're just lucky. And somebody looked at me today, I was telling them this, we're just lucky. And they were lucky. I said, yeah, we're just lucky that this thing only has a 1 to 3% mortality rate. That this isn't, a bad one. That has this virus has a little flaw in it. And its flaw is that it can attach to your throat or your esophagus. And if it does that, you get a bad cough, you get some tightness in your chest, and your throat closes up, and in a few days of water and rest and all like that, you're better. Its other option is it can attach to lung tissue. If it attaches to lung tissue, you're most likely going to have a struggle. So we're lucky that it actually attaches to throat tissue too, because the mortality rate would be 40%.
I'm wearing these so much lately, my nose is, oh, you're on the phone, never mind.
I think one of the things we've kind of talked about is getting the message out, and then politics with it is anytime you have situations that are similar to this or different than this, you get all the people who are posting their comments and giving their feedback on it. And I'm not in higher ed right now, I'm in K-12, and I work with kids who have significant disabilities. And so all the schools right now, they are operating on, I was in a meeting this morning, and they are operating on a 3-pronged instruction piece right now. It's getting food to the kids, making sure they're safe, and the third one is keeping people whole. And so that's mental health, that's all of those things. Frankly, they're not worried about academics right now and all of those things. And we're looking at those kids who don't have access to Wi-Fi. And so you start seeing all these comments and articles that are being written from people that are going, well, why don't we just move online tomorrow? Why don't we do this? And when we look at North Carolina, most of our kids don't have access to that. We have a lot of vulnerable population. Even our college students, when they shut down the universities, my son goes to UNCG, they had already had spring break and been back on campus for a week before they decided to shut down. And so you start looking at support like that and making sure they have food and safety. And where do people go that can't go back home, or they can't go somewhere else? And then they keep sending out announcements, please quit living in everybody, like having these groups live in one apartment because they went to stay at a friend's house, and now they're no longer social distancing because they all moved in with one friend who had an off-campus apartment. So this is really going to be a situation that does play out in the classes and in the politics, because students who have less income are going to have less resources through this, and they're probably going to end up suffering the most. We're making good attempts at getting food out there. We're making some attempts to reach them, but it's still not the same. So I do think we're going to see a lot of political fallout later.
Higher ed, one of the kind of doesn't get a lot of press. It occasionally does get some press, but it doesn't get a lot of press. There's a fairly significant housing insecurity and food insecurity issue in higher ed. I mean, we have kids that they're, and they are pretty good at hiding it. But we have kids that, live out of their cars, live in parking lots, or they've got a crappy old RV that, their dad gave up on 20 years ago and they managed to get it running. Or they, and food's always an issue. They're just trying to figure out how they eat and, what to eat. And, they can get student loans to stay in school because they're so disadvantaged. They just can't live anyplace. They don't have enough money for housing. They don't have enough money for food. And so they're, I've heard numbers in some schools that's as high as, 10, 12%. And even in large schools, large research institutions, large state schools, it could be, 4 or 5% of these students. Well, where do they go? What do they do? They have no money. They have no resource. About the only thing that was keeping them going was the fact they had classes. that could be paid for with student financing, with student financing. And so it is I mean, this is a really different, unique, scary thing.
And I kind of wonder long-term, as we talked a little bit about attrition or mortality and student populations, and this is my topic for our other class paper, is attending to students with mental health and disabilities through crisis like this. Some of the people who, whether they could be also food insecure or homeless, but they also have mental health issues too, and we have just pulled all structure and support out that used to be there for them. So that is an area that I think we're going to lose a lot of those students and see some decline in mental health functioning of those college students who are in that group that were functioning with the supports in place, but now they're gone. And there's very limited right now. Most of the disability supports right now are all about getting access to the online curriculum. If you're blind, can you access the print materials? If you're hearing impaired, can you get captioning? That's kind of the thing that's the biggest focus. They're not looking at kids who may be on the autism spectrum and just lost all their routine or mental health. So I think we're going to see a big loss of those students who may have been being successful in their programs and may not make it back after this.
Yeah, I agree. I think, you know, of concern, I have a good friend I talked to on on a Zoom conference today. We've got a piece of research we're working on, kind of sitting for a little while now because we really need to get together and go over some data together and all like that. But he's a clinical psychologist and also an MD, intervention MD. And his concern is the level of depression and suicide among college-age individuals, because you know, they haven't yet demonstrated that they can come face to face with tough times and make it through. And except for vets and some other people, they have a higher incident, higher risk of suicide under stress than almost any other age group. Now, you know, we know that there are some professions where it's pretty high with emergency medical people and law enforcement and you know, retired military, even military at this point. I mean, there are pockets of job titles, but as a class, as a group, college age individuals actually have some of the highest suicide levels that we see. And he's very concerned about what happens without these supports and without the, you know, the intervention services and the, you know, student health services and clinical services and all those things that are available to them, you know, when they're in school. And you know, they can go talk to somebody and it's non-judgmental and all those things. What happens when they have to come back into an environment that's creating stress for them anyhow, whether it's a home environment or not having money or not having food or not having a place to live or whatever? You know, do we see a spike in that incident? And his take on it is, and he's been doing this for quite a while, his take on it is that, yeah, we probably will. Unless there's something in one of these, you know, rescue packages that puts some effort into community services or whatever. But I just don't know that that's going to happen because, you know, that's not something that senators tend to think about too much. You know, they tend to think about how do I get reelected and how can I make some money. But I'm sorry, is that cynical? I don't mean to be cynical, and I don't mean to be depressive. But you know, these are real issues that we have to kind of play with a little bit and think about because they're real. They're real issues. And so you know, there's the direct cost of like a pandemic, like a virus. And then there's the indirect cost and collateral damage from it. And I'm not sure we have even thought about too much about the collateral damage and the indirect cost of this, because it will impact a lot of people and a lot of them in fairly negative ways. So, you just, I tell people, you wonder why I didn't go into corporate work or, things like that where you could actually make some money. And I said, well, at least I'll have a job as long as there's a need for information and there's human suffering. You'll always have a job in education, because we end up having to be the vessel that fixes those issues, or has to charged with fixing those issues a lot. So it is there are some other issues here that I don't want to dwell on too much, but they're real issues, and they're life and death issues too. But they're not direct to the virus; they're indirect or collateral. But they will be real issues. Other thoughts, other kind of. Well, I'm sorry to be such a downer at the end of things, but I was trying to find a way to slip that in earlier that just didn't seem to be a good spot to do that. Well, here's the good news. You have 1 or 2 less assignments to do. Okay, the little friends thing just didn't seem quite appropriate under the circumstances. And that was one I was question marked at the beginning of the course, because I just picked it up from one of the other syllabus. But so we're not going to do that. And I cut down the length of the remaining 2 assignments a few pages, because we do need to talk about all of these elements that have an impact on higher ed organization, and we sort of are. That's what we're going to spend some time on. And then the final project, kind of pulling it all together. Now, if you want to focus attention at your institution, or the institution you're kind of dealing with here, and this current crisis, and bring into play, some of these other elements about structure and things like that are going to play out, political influences, cultural influences, feel free to do so, and not be limited by the question sets. And because I think this is kind of something that's what do they call it? A learning opportunity. Kind of a point at which we can, take some of these more structural elements and more organizational elements and apply it to a real life tsunami, so to speak, and see how it plays out, see what, and project out, where do you think it's going in the future once we get past this, and we will. It's just a matter of whether it's 2 months or 5 months, or and we will not be totally rid of it until we have a vaccine and we have treatment protocols. It'll come back in smaller outbreaks, but we won't be past it until we actually have a way to treat it, or detect it, or cut it off at the pass, vaccinate for it. And so what will institutions have to do? I mean, what kind of models will they have to, evolve into? What kind of practices will they have to evolve toward? I'm not sure many people, maybe the military did, but I'm not sure many institutions of higher ed had, a plan in that little black book that's in, drawer 3 in the president's and provost's office, that tells you what to do in every scenario like that. But I'm not sure this scenario is in there. And it needs to be. We need to have, a pretty good sense of what is it that we will do if something like this happens in a smaller form or bigger form or whatever. The scientists are they're not real clear on it yet, but I can't help but think that there might be an incidental connection here between a warming Earth and, the development of some of these viruses, or, kind of the speed at which they work. Because what do you do if you want to grow a virus or a bacteria? Typically, you heat them up. You put them in something wet and you heat them up. Now, viruses like dry, but, they like hot. They like to be heated up. And so I can't help but maybe think there's, some of this climate change stuff may have, in some way, be a little bit of a, a spark for some of these things that we seem to be seeing now. But we'll kind of see. But higher ed institutions going to have plans in place. They're going to have, think about is there a structure? Do we have a person who we have to, kind of assign to be the person that works on crisis plans? We did that with the gun issue. We developed all the procedures for lockdowns and shelter in place and, run when you can, and, all those things that are now, part of our regular process, and that we cover with students when they come in. And they probably know them better than we do, because they've been learning them since, elementary school these days. But, that's now part of the protocol, where it wasn't even something we would have considered 30 years ago or 40 years ago. But now we can't not consider it. So if this thing is something that's a precursor for other things that we might have to deal with in the future, what's the plan going to be? What's the structural elements going to be that will allow us to deal with it? Maybe a little bit better than this one in higher ed institutions.
So I had a question. You said that we could write about this virus and use our institution as an example. Is that because there are two assignments, like under the gender analysis, and then there's the final paper. So is that
the gender
write about it 2 times or 1 time?
But
so
you can kind of approach it and this is what I was kind of thinking, because the next piece we're going to talk about is the cultural elements, and we'll get into the gender issue and the diversity issue, and all those sorts of issues, because that unlike any other place in our society, that occupies higher ed. I mean, we really do have, I was thinking today, I was sitting there, I was thinking, okay, let me see, my boss is female, my provost is female, my chancellor is female. So much for that male privilege thing, at least on my part. It still exists, but we keep where the gender division, the gender power structures in higher ed is changing much faster than maybe any other institutions in our society. And old gray-haired old white guys like me got to figure out how do we fit into these new structures, and how do we become a contributing part to it without becoming someone that insults people or whatever. I grew in my day. I grew up in academic environments where you argued about everything. That's what you did, and it was considered to be a good discussion. And then you would go away and go have a beer together or have a drink together, and you'd be best buds. And then the next time you confronted another issue, you'd argue about that one too. And that's the way you got ideas out. That's the way you spun out, different ideas, but you accepted the fact that other people had different ideas. I'm finding that my argumentative, fairly blunt approach to dealing with issues and all, it doesn't work as well in these new settings. And so I've had to learn how to sit back and listen a bit more. And that's been, you know, a personal change on my part, simply because the environment in which I function is different. And, you know, I welcome the difference. I think it's a great difference. But, you know, there's a lot of guys like me that have to figure out how to, you know, how to be contributing, but, you know, not overbearing. And that's unfortunately, you know, a struggle that some guys never really deal with or confront. But, you know, I was told early on from my wife and all of my professional friends who mostly tended to be female for whatever reason, that I had to learn how to comport myself, because I was getting into a different world, and you know, I might end up old and cynical if I didn't figure out how to comport myself better. And so that was a transition I'm still making, or trying to make. I get carried away sometimes. Okay, I'm sorry. I got a story to tell you. Okay, the institution I was at before I came to App was James Madison, and it was very much an institution in which we did have rigorous discussions about things. And if you couldn't hold your own in those discussions, you didn't have much value to the university, because they wanted people to come up with ideas and new ideas. And the only way you can come up with those ideas is by, you know, tearing down old ideas, at least modifying old ideas quite a bit. And so we had rigorous discussions. Well, I got hired at App, and because I'd done a lot of work with assessment and helped build the student assessment system at James Madison, and helped build the model or the guidelines for the student assessment system in the state of Virginia, and was on those steering committees, you know, the first committee they stuck me on was a committee that was restructuring the core program for teacher education. And at that time, it had 3 courses. It had a technology course, it had a psych course, and it had a kind of a history and philosophy of education course. And then maybe one other, I forget what the other one was. But we had, it was understood that we needed to get some other content in that core, like assessment, you know, principles of assessment, assessing student learning, dealing with diverse students, dealing with students with special needs, you know, all those things that a modern teacher needs to be aware of and needs to know how to deal with. Well, institutions of higher ed are very territorial. And so obviously psychology didn't want to lose all those course credits. And, you know, the technology folks didn't want to lose their credits, but we were locked into the number of credits we had. And we had these additional content elements fit in. And so we went with a model, instead of having 3 courses, 4 courses with 3 credits. Yeah, there was a 4th course, I can't remember now. 4 courses with 3 credits. We ended up having 6 courses with 2 credits. So it was still 12 credit hours, because that was what we could do. And so we had to figure out some logistic issues in terms of load and funding and all that sort of stuff. And that was relatively easy. But then we had to figure out if we cut psychology back to 2 credits, what did we need for them to teach? And one of the elements they had always taught was dealing with standardized tests. And they were assumed that that would be all that teachers would need in assessment, is how to deal with standardized tests, that other assessment things would be taught in their methods classes. Well, the methods classes are too packed with everything else to kind of put that into anyhow. So we were having a discussion, the very first meeting I went to, very first one, about need for these assessment content. And I brought a handout and laid out, you know, this is what the literature says, this is what the literature says that we should have for pre-service teachers. I mean, this is what teachers need to have. And a senior faculty, female faculty of psychology, who was the lead person on the, the work with the College of Ed, she said, well, we teach that. I said, okay, well, tell me what you teach about assessment. And she said, well, we teach them how to read standardized tests and what's meant by standard scores and what's meant by, quartiles and what's meant by stay nines and what's meant. And I said, well, do you teach them anything that has to do with assessment for learning, formative assessment, summative assessment, comprehensive assessment models, authentic assessment, like that? And she said, well, no, but we teach them this, this, and this. And I said, well, it's not enough. It just doesn't work. And unfortunately, it was not a great day for her. And she had other things going on. She and I became good friends, and she had other things going on. And, this kind of, I pushed her over the edge with this kind of, blunt approach that I'd always used for 30 years in higher ed. And, she started to cry a little bit and got up and left the room. And so, at that point, one of the other senior female faculty that I'd known for years, and she was part of the draw. She had taught me to come down there. Susan, she came up and she put her arm around me and she said, you got a lot to learn. You really got a lot to learn. And at that point, I assumed I had a lot to learn. And so she was willing to mentor me into appropriate ways of comporting myself for the new culture at App State, because it was a different culture. It was a more agreeable culture, a more let's see if we can work this thing out and everybody agree and get along sort of culture. And I come from a much more competitive university culture, and so I had to learn a new one. And so when we get to that, this next segment, which will begin to talk about those cultural issues and the gender issues and things like that, I'm probably going to step back a bit and have you sort of carry most of the discussion about that, because, I think those are issues that, are more contemporary to you these days, and I'm still having to learn how to comport myself in those scenarios. And, it's more important for you to feel comfortable talking about those things than it is for me. I mean, I'm old. Who knows? I haven't left the house in about a week though, so I think I'm okay. No symptoms. So my wife and I did go to Walmart today. That may not have been. I wore gloves. I had surgical gloves on. So, and used all the sanitizers, we got out and stuff. Didn't touch my face all day. And so now everything is itching. I want to scratch everything, but I haven't touched my face. And so, I may make it till next week. And then we can talk about gender and diversity issues, multicultural issues. We'll start by talking a little bit about some of the political stuff, because there are a couple of concepts in there that are, particularly in that letter from Machiavelli sort of notion, where it talks about sort of the essential things about, understanding the political environment of higher ed institutions. And so I want to spend a bit of moment talking about that, but I don't want to certainly do that this evening. I want you to be contemplative as you leave today. I don't want you to be, but you do have, just the 2 assignments left.
You said you were going to read our first paper.
I started doing that. Yeah. I started doing that Sunday, and then I had to get back off of something else today, and I'll get back to that. But it'll be just a general, writing style sort of edit, of logic and organization, things like that. I mean, these papers are your thoughts. They're not my thoughts. And so it's not for me to, you know, critique how you put it together, but I can critique how well you may have said it.
So will you send that by email, or is that something you'll put
I'll
in
just send you
Zoom,
a
like
PDF
a
with
PDF?
markup on it. Yeah.
And I wanted to confirm the length of the last paper, because I know this next paper is what, 3 to 5 pages.
Yeah. The last one, I think I bumped that down to what, 10 to 12, something like that. The original language had you writing about a 15-page paper or something, and you know, I bumped it down to about 10 to 12, I think. When you think about though, if you just put I mean, if you got a title page on it and things like that, you're, you know, double spaced. Everything's double spaced because I can't read anything single spaced comfortably without having a drink, and then makes even less sense. But yeah, it's easier to grade that way. Yeah, double spaced. Yeah. So you know, it's not a long paper, but it's hopefully a thoughtful piece of work. I mean, you're going to have to live in this environment, this new environment, a whole lot longer than I will. You know, my time limit's always 3 to 5 years. I'm either leaving in 3 years or 5 years, and until I get to 3 years, and I realize I can do another 3 to 5 years. But you know, at some point, you know, the clock kind of runs out on you, and you kind of forget why you're getting up for in the morning. And when that happens, you better just, you know. What is it? Mel Brooks and Carl Reiner said the first thing you do every morning is get up and check the obituaries, and if they're not in it, then they get up and have breakfast, smoke a cigar or something like that. But not quite to that point yet. But I realize there is an expiration date out there somewhere.
Dr. Bolt, you may have already mentioned this and I missed it, but could we maybe go over the last 2 assignments a little bit, or were you waiting?
Sure. No. Let me pull that stuff up.
I know that I may be creatively finding time here and there. And so when I have those opportunities, I just want to be able to work on things.
That's not a problem. Let me get
okay. Thank you so much.
The outline piece here. All right, let's talk about the final project first. Let me kind of, because I may be making some changes to the rubric a little bit. Yeah, okay. Let me pop this criteria up a little bit, and then we can kind of talk a bit through it. And then there is, did I give you an outline for that? I can't remember. Give me just a second here.
It's in our syllabus, I think.
Yeah, I thought I'd maybe given you a complete outline, but I don't guess I did. Once again, I like to keep things as some of the folks in this class can tell you, I like to keep things kind of somewhat loose. Okay, yeah. You know, the first one was purely structural stuff. I mean, you know, what did the institution look like? What kinds of structures were in place? And so that's the one I'll be reading, you know, mostly for I think style and formatting and things like that. And I started doing that already. The second one we're not doing. The third one, let me pop this up in the share thingy. Okay. Get it over here where I can see it. Okay. We're going to add, you know, the readings that are coming up. are mostly about gendered and feminist perspectives on higher ed, and they're fairly generic, and they're not terribly long. And I don't know that you can apply that one directly to what's happening in the school these days. I don't think you can apply that one directly to this crisis. I mean, you could, but it'd be you might not want to get into that sort of tangled web of analysis to kind of deal with that. But this next one will deal with the burgeoning role, okay, if I can use that term, of feminist thought and gendered thought in higher education. You know, one of the things that higher ed institutions have always been is sort of hotbeds of cultural change, and things happen. You know, change occurs in higher ed institutions on a cultural sense a whole lot more readily than they happen on an organizational sense. And you find that, you know, the people that you work with and the students you have contact with, and, you know, all those things are of a category in society that is willing to look at different ways of how people live, and how, you know, how they function, and what they identify with and what they identify as. And so I think the growth of sort of the influence of feminist thought and gendered thought in institutions of higher ed, and this concept of what's called the greedy institution, and you'll understand what that means when you see the reading. Yeah, is this organization that you wrote about in the first paper, how does it deal with these issues? I mean, can you see evidence of these issues? You know, I sort of made light earlier of the fact I had all my bosses were female, and you know, that's an example of an institution that's sensitive to a different perspective than they've traditionally had. Now, I don't know whether it was brought on by, you know, bringing a female chancellor in, who then saw it kind of as part of her role is to, you know, mentor and provide leadership and, you know, foster leadership development for people across the campus that may not have been represented fairly or unfairly in organizational structure, whether they be, you know, sexually orientation diverse, or be female, or be, you know, ethnic or racially diverse, or, you know, that may have been part of her sort of self-grand mission. I don't know. The only thing I can say is that the university doesn't seem to be running any worse than it did before. But, you know, if anyway, it's maybe a little bit more stable than it was before. And so it's had an impact on higher ed institutions in more ways than you think about. And so I want you to think about that organizational structure that you talked about in the first one, and what impact sort of these gender notions have had on that. And you can organize loosely around one of these questions, or you can combine elements of a couple of them. I mean, you don't necessarily have to follow just one and follow it down the line or whatever. I mean, that's perfectly fine. But the readings, have I turned those on? I don't know. Let me look real quick here. Yeah, I've got one more to turn on, but there's a couple there. I've got one more to turn on, but you know, in the broadest sense, we're kind of bringing a gendered focus to it, to those ideas. I'll have to look at the deadline. The deadline may be early to give you time to, you know, kind of think through those readings and stuff like that, but I'll have to think about that. Because we only have X amount of time left, period, and we're getting close. And then the final paper is really just kind of pulling a lot of these elements together and connecting them up, and you know, providing some continuity to it, some, you know, coherent thought process to it, and you know, creating sort of a way of dealing with that. Okay. Does that help so far?
Yes, this is great.
Okay. And once again, my failing, which unfortunately it's kind of the way I do things. I resist providing too much structure,
Mhm.
because you know, these are your higher ed students. I mean, I deal with mostly higher ed students and doc students, and so you know, I want to provide enough structure so that you're all, you know, at least thinking off of the same sort of process, but I don't want to provide too much structure that you then have to feel like you have to do it a particular way or a certain way. I want it to be scholarly in notion.
So for the last paper, is it the same idea that you could combine some of these questions or things that maybe are most relevant to your organization?
Yeah, with the only slight revision or slant that you know, somewhere in there, maybe as a post log or something like that, maybe a short discussion or some discussion about changes that might have to be made to this organization,
Okay.
to accommodate this sort of grand crisis that we're all dealing with.
Almost like an action plan.
Sort of, yeah.
Sort of.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Thank
It
you.
doesn't have to be real, you know, overly detailed. Just, you know, it can be more narrative. But if you like doing things as an action plan, a little bit more detailed, that's fine too. I'm a concise sort of scholar. I tell people my dissertation is less than 80 pages, and it was voted the outstanding dissertation of that class. So it doesn't have to be long. It has to get to the meaning of the message. And you know, I encourage people to write in more concise manners, but I also encourage you to write the way that you are used to writing, in terms of style or flow or whatever.
Concise wins in my book, so, and to the point. Thank you very much.
I just always had trouble after I said what I wanted to say and provided the support for it, thinking about what else do I say? Because I basically said what I wanted to say, and I gave you reasons why I said that, and now, you know, go away, leave me alone. And some people appreciated that. Occasionally they didn't. My classic assessment story is my first paper I wrote in college as a freshman in 1960 some odd, and at Virginia Tech was a history class, and every history class in the 1960s at Virginia Tech was a Civil War history class. And a lot of the historians were ex-military, and they didn't go back to the Civil War, but they were ex-military. And so I learned, I had my first history class with Colonel Duke Bayard, and he was very stiff, very rigid, and very monotone, and very, you know, all of those things. But he was enamored with the Civil War. And so he wanted to see how well we could write. So he gave us a paper. First week of class, he gave us a paper. He said, I want you to write a 6 to 8 page paper on the root causes of the Civil War. And, you know, this, at that time, Tech had Monday, Wednesday, Friday classes. They had Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday morning classes. And so Tuesday afternoon was a lab afternoon. Thursday afternoon was a lab afternoon, and Saturday afternoon was football. And so it was, you know, it was. But I had one of those Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday classes. And so he gave us a couple of weeks to get the paper ready. And so, you know, I did it the way you were supposed to write papers, which I'd never really done too much before. I wrote it, I set it aside, I came back and reread it, made some edits on it. And this is all edits on a typewriter, by the way. This is way before computers. And then I gave it to somebody else to read and took their edits and put it in. So I, you know, by the time I turned it in, I thought this thing's perfect. I've written this thing 4 times now. It's got to be perfect. It's got to be perfect. And I turned it in, and on a Saturday morning, and he promised he would have them back by Tuesday morning, ready for, you know, give us our grade Tuesday morning. And sure enough, Tuesday morning, very first thing, he came around, handed out papers, and, you know, on the cover page, you know, at those times you had the cover page. And then you went inside and started the paper. And so on the cover page, and it was all stapled together, and on the cover page it said, wonderfully written, very insightful thesis. I enjoyed reading it. Turn the page, first page of the paper, D. Too bad you misspelled 3 words. Actually, I misspelled the same word 3 times. I now know, and I will take it to my grave, that there is a rat in separate. I misspelled separate 3 times. And he didn't give us a rubric or anything, but he gave a letter grade deduction for every misspelled word. And out of 25, 28 students, he had 14 Fs and a handful of Ds. But it was a well-written paper. Unfortunately, it was graded on how many words I misspelled. And so, you know, that's the kind of thing that happened, you know, back in higher ed in those days, that now you would get, you know, you get shot over that. You'd be in court so quick that, you know, you wouldn't have time to, you know, put your false teeth in or whatever. I mean, but it was, you know, it was one of those experiences where you learn something. I ended up getting an A in the course because later on he threw those grades out. But it was his way of getting our attention that we needed to not only write, but we had to write with appropriate, you know, grammar and things like that. I still think it's a very crappy way to do assessment, to evaluate something. But, you know, he got his point across, and then after that, everybody did okay with it. But it was you know, it was a learning experience, and I think everything we go through is a learning experience. And I always encourage people to be concise because, you know, in higher ed, everybody can write. Everybody can say, you know, wonderful things in a paper. But does it really mean anything? Is it helpful and all that sort of stuff? And so, you know, I think if you learn how to write in a more concise manner, typically you write a little bit better, but maybe not. I don't know. There's Hemingway and then there's Faulkner, you know, and they both won Nobel Prizes, I guess, or Pulitzer Prizes. So.
Dr. Bolt, I hate to be the question person this evening, but I have one more question.
Sure.
I'm just trying to get all the unknowns out there so that there's something known in right now. But for the paper, the consulting team, is that to be the same team that we worked with before?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
And then for the last paper, feel free to consult your consulting team, but you know, it's pretty much yours.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you.
Other questions, thoughts, rants? Well, I go rant to my dog or my wife now for a little while, so better do the dog. Probably has a better outcome on that. But we'll move this forward. I'll get stuff posted up. I think the last resource posted up. I'll try to get the rest of the resources out of the way this week. Get those papers, looked at, some feedback on them. Get those back to you. So when as you're writing the next one, you get kind of benefit of that. And then I guess I'll see you next week. We'll talk a little bit about political perspectives. Add some of that stuff in the handouts today, and then we'll talk a bit about the feminist and other diversity sort of angles that we have to deal with in higher ed. And that doesn't sound good, does it? Have to deal with it. We don't have to deal with it. I mean, higher ed is a reflection of the culture around us, and so we have to be leaders in that culture and not just be reflections of that culture. Okay, well, folks, have a good one. Stay safe, shelter in place, do all that nice stuff, and make sure that you do your social distancing when you go to work. Stephanie, just stay away from people, yeah, and wash your hands a lot, do a lot of sanitizer, all that crap, and we'll all get through this. I know if I do, you will, I'm sure, just fine. Okay, have a good evening, and I will see you all next week.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.